I've been reflecting on my childhood. There's a trauma-shaped hole that incessantly niggles away at my mind. I remember deeply disturbing bits and pieces from my time in the red playroom, and that only makes me fear what I've suppressed. I only ask whether any of you had such a room at school because I read something online that seemed eerily reminiscent of my experience. It made me think that my school's perturbing playroom might not have been an isolated anomaly. Unfortunately, I was right. I hosted a few friends at my house this evening, and most of them laughed at my seemingly odd question, but Sarah didn't. Her saucer-eyed face trembled as she nodded slowly. She and I went to different schools, so that only confirmed what I had always feared. The red playroom was not a figment of my imagination. It was more sinister than I thought. And believe me when I tell you that what Sarah and I experienced was already sinister enough. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sarah asked after the rest of our friends had left. I nodded. "It's all I've been able to think about this evening. Who goes first?" She gulped. "You. Let me summon the courage." At my school, the red playroom was a dreaded place. None of us wanted to play in there. And the teachers never even told us about it. We just happened upon it. Wedged between a storage room and the far wall of the school, there was an inconspicuous door. "Did this used to be here?" Tim asked, pointing it out during our lunch break. He opened the door to reveal a small box room, 10 by 10 feet, with bright red walls, gray carpet, a tiled ceiling, and horrid fluorescent lights. There was an assortment of various toys on the floor and the detached hood of a yellow floral coat. "We should go and hand it in to Miss," Stacy chirped up. Tim thumped her in the arm. "Snitch. Don't ruin this cool little hideaway by telling the teacher that we're in here." "I don't like it," I said. "It's too bright." "And quiet," Thomason whispered. "Good," Tim laughed, bounding into the red room. "This can be our hideout." "I don't think we should go in there," Stacy said. "Well, go away then," Tim snorted, turning to me. "Jake?" I begrudgingly stepped inside, not wanting to have my cool card revoked. The carpet felt too soft beneath my feet. That's a weird comment to make because I was wearing shoes, but it's the only way I can describe it. Everyone other than Tim seemed frightened. Being the boisterous leader of the group, he had to appear unfazed, but I always wondered whether he secretly felt what I know the rest of us must have felt. We didn't belong there. But that didn't stop Tim from taking us into the red playroom day after day, week after week. We just sat and talked, pretending not to be terrified of the uneven place. Tim said it was a great room for just getting away from people. I think he wanted to seem tough enough to handle the horror. One day, however, some new toys appeared. "Look at this cool thing," Tim laughed, picking up a small ball with a smiley face on it. "Buck the Chuckler, its tag says." "It's horrible," Thomason shuddered. "Nah, he's smiling. He's friendly." Tim smirked, preparing to throw Buck at Thomason. She winced, and Tim cackled, placing the ball back on the floor. I rolled my eyes at her, drawing circles in the air around my ear to indicate what I thought of Tim, and she giggled. "What's that one?" Stacy asked, pointing at a small figurine on the ground. Tim picked it up, and we gathered around to get a better look. It was a plastic man dressed in a green hooded raincoat. At that moment, the bell sounded. "Come on," I said. "Let's go." As we entered the classroom, something caught my attention. "Why did you bring that with you, Tim?" I sighed. My friend grinned, stroking the figurine. "Nobody's going to miss him." "Yes, they will. Here I've been reflecting on my childhood. There's a trauma-shaped hole that incessantly niggles away at my mind. I remember deeply disturbing bits and pieces from my time in the red playroom, and that only makes me fear what I've suppressed. I only ask whether any of you had such a room at school because I read something online that seemed eerily reminiscent of my experience. It made me think that my school's perturbing playroom might not have been an isolated anomaly. Unfortunately, I was right. I hosted a few friends at my house this evening, and most of them laughed at my seemingly odd question, but Sarah didn't. Her saucer-eyed face trembled as she nodded slowly. She and I went to different schools, so that only confirmed what I had always feared. The red playroom was not a figment of my imagination. It was more sinister than I thought. "And believe me when I tell gonna get in trouble," I said. "Whatever," Tim shrugged, fiddling with the figure's limbs. Probably gonna chuck it anyway. His arms and legs don't even move. He's not an action figure, dumbarse, I said, rolling my eyes. On the way out of the classroom, Tim threw the figurine into the bin, much to my annoyance. I wanted to fish it out and put it back in the red playroom, but our teacher was standing nearby, and I didn't want to incriminate myself. So I left it. And I wish that had been the end of the story. But the next day, Tim was pale-faced and fidgety. "What's up with you?" Thomason asked. Tim asked, absent-mindedly. "Nothing. Just pulled an all-nighter." "Want to go to the red playroom?" Stacy asked, attempting to sound braver than usual. "Nah, that room's lame," Tim shivered. Yet, when the girls moved out of earshot, my friend leaned over and whispered something unnerving. "I saw the green raincoat man in my room last night." "What are you?" I began, but I was interrupted by the lunch bell. That was when something happened which shattered my town for years to come. As I was walking to the main school building, I noticed that Tim had fallen behind me. When I turned to face him, however, he was nowhere to be seen. Search parties worked tirelessly over the coming weeks, but the boy was never found. That was 15 years ago, and his parents still long for answers. They're never going to get any because nobody would believe the truth. When I ran into the building to seek help, the door to the red playroom was gone, and I started to convince myself that I'd imagined the entire thing. I think Stacy and Thomason did the same. As I say, there are blank spots in my memory, but I'm sure our fear of the room stemmed from things we'd seen and heard in there, terrors that I've suppressed. I instantly knew the playroom was to blame for Tim's disappearance. And on the final day of primary school, 2 years after Tim's vanishing, I finally had confirmation. I was alone in the corridor, and I heard a creak from the far corner by the storage room. The door to the red playroom had reappeared, and when I tentatively pushed it open, I found myself facing something haunting in the center of the carpet. 2 figurines. The green raincoat man and what looked like a miniaturized version of my best friend. While screaming in disbelief at what had become of Tim, I suddenly found myself in a deeper spiral of horror. The carpet began to tear, and long arms emerged through the floorboards. A life-sized version of the eerie raincoat figurine. The slim man looked at me with a face too smooth and featureless to be real. Like the figurine on the floor, he seemed to be composed of plastic or resin. As his spindly fingers shot towards me, I screeched, fell backwards, and slammed the door on his arm. But his fingers curled around the edge of the door, and I prepared to join Tim. At least he won't be alone in that evil room, I thought, frightfully sobbing. "Jake!" Miss Hall shouted. Hands pressed on the door, I spun to face the frowning teacher in the corridor, and just like that, I realized my mistake. The woodwork vanished from my fingers, and when I turned to face the wall, it was just that, a wall. I've visited the school numerous times over the past 15 years, but the red playroom has never reappeared. Tim is lost forever. After I finished speaking, Sarah's face was completely frozen. "It's okay. You don't have to tell your story," I said. She shook her head. My friend did have a story, but she didn't tell it in words. She told it by slowly pulling a hand out of her pocket. "This is Jennifer," she whispered. Sarah revealed a figurine of a small girl with a yellow floral coat.